Good part of the day, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to make a quick review of all the books that I read in 2023. So counting up, it's somewhere 75, 73 books, so let's get started. 1 Plus 1 by Dave Trott is the first book that I read in 2023. It's basically a book of collections of different short stories that make you think. So according to the name of the book, 1 plus 1 equals 3, it should make you see things different. On These Things by Krishnamutri. It's a book about life, culture, everything evolving around the life, basically. So Krishnamutri is an Indian teacher who shares his views on life and how to live life. Is also a book about Krishnamurti. It's a collection of his advice for each day. So the book contains 350 small and actionable steps to improve your life. Path by Paul Millard. Well, it's basically an autobiography of Paul Millard, who shares his journey of trying to find meaning in his life through unconventional ways, from corporate job to becoming an online writer. It's a good book, but if you want to find meaning in your life or try to find it, better read the Krishnamutri books of Viktor Frankl's Man's Searching Work by Austin Klein, his book designed for creators. So Austin Klein shares in his book 10 actionable ways how to get recognized and how to show the Naval Ravikant is about Naval Ravikant, who is a successful entrepreneur, investor. Naval basically shares his life journey and how he got to be a millionaire, what life advice worked for him and what didn't. He also shares the books that he read while he was on his journey to becoming an entrepreneur. A really good book one by Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb in his book describes the Black Swan event, which is basically an improbable event, but it carries a lot of weight and is unpredictable, but it has a really big impact. So he tries to describe in what is Black Swan in real life and why we should care the game. Also by Nassim Taleb is a book about why people don't care if they're not directly involved in some project. So it basically says and explains why people who are stakeholders care about the outcomes. And other book by Nassim Taleb, Fooled by Randomness. So Fooled by Randomness is my favorite out of all Nassim Taleb's books, and I think if you want to read Nassim Taleb, you should probably just read this one, because Nassim Taleb is infamous for his writing, and his writing contains a lot of non-existent, difficult words, incomprehensible, but Fooled by Randomness is simple and understandable. Procrustes, the last book that I read of Nassim Taleb's. The Bed of Procrustes is a mythology from Greek world. It's a story about a man who feed his visitors the bed by either stretching them or cutting their limbs. So this book should help you to see ways differently and to reject the common wisdom which is not applicable. Yes, Viagra and Lipitor. It's a history book about how people have come up with different medications, and it's really interesting because they all usually are not accidents but almost like an accident. For example, Viagra was initially designed to treat cardiovascular diseases, and the Viagra effect is actually a side effect. So if you're interested in medicine and what kind of drugs we use and how people come up with them, you should learn Losing $1 Million by Jim Paul. It's a roller coaster of Jim Paul's life, how from being a poor kid he became a millionaire, then he lost all his money, and then with the lessons that he learned, he became rich again. So it really teaches you how to not get crazy when money comes. Millionaire Mind by Thomas Stanley. This book describes how an average millionaire looks, what does he do, how he became a millionaire, where does he live, what does millionaire do in his leisure time. So it's demographics of millionaires and their statistics. It tries to understand the behavior of millionaires. It's really interesting how we perceive millionaires and actually turn out that millionaires behave completely differently. We by Yevgeny Zamyatin is actually one of the first anti-utopian novels. Yevgeny Zamyatin is a Russian novelist who inspired George Orwell to write 1984, and his book We is really interesting, and if you like anti-utopia you should probably read it, or if you like anti-utopia you probably have already read it. Fashionable nonsense. Alan Sokal describes in his books how postmodernist thinkers and pseudosciences or even real scientists use science articles to bolster their theories and arguments, but the problem is that those pseudoscientists and postmodernist thinkers don't understand how the science works. It results in a lot of information which is misinterpreted and is not correct. You'd be actually surprised how many things are not scientifically correct, and still people talk about them every day. And the problem is that not just ordinary people, but in the academia world too. The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite writers because his writing abilities are so great, and it's always a pleasure to read one of his books, and Tipping Point is not an exception. Tipping Point is about how small things can accumulate over time, and because small things are usually unnoticed, the result that they give in the end quite surprising. For example, how a single sick person can start a flu epidemic, and all the other examples provided in his books, and I think it's worth to read. Outliers is the second book that I read of Malcolm Gladwell's, and Outliers is about high achievers. Malcolm Gladwell tries to explain and define the properties of high achieving people, how they become really good at what they're doing. So he explains why Asians are good at math, what it takes to become a professional soccer player, and why Beatles were so popular. The Millionaire Fastlane by M.J. DeMarco was probably the biggest motivational pump for me in 2023. It was really eye-opening to me. Well, regarding that, I don't have to go into corporate world in order to make money. In the hope of finding that kind of motivational pump from M.J. DeMarco, I read his other books unscripted, but I didn't find anything there that is particularly interesting or beneficial. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's, as you can probably tell from the name of the book, it's about money. And Morgan Housel argues that, well, we all used to thinking that money and finance is all about numbers and formulas. It's a math-based field. But actually people use money according to their behavior. So Morgan Housel not just observes the behavior of people with money, but also gives simple advice about how to be better with money. 59 Seconds by Richard Wiseman. Richard Wiseman is a renowned psychologist, so he basically says that 59 seconds is more than enough to improve your life, and he shares the tips and frameworks behind his 59 seconds. And what I got from it is that you better to do something now if you can decide between two options, because the cost of not doing anything and waiting for resolvement is more than doing and making a mistake. Not everyone gets a trophy. So this book about management, and it's only for managers, I think, because Bruce teaches how to be a good manager for millennials. And it's really interesting to see the behaviors of millennials and how they are different from the baby boomers and boomers, and how they are different from Gen Z, which is up. The One Thing by Gary Keller is probably the second biggest motivational pump that I got from self-help books, because the One Thing framework is about getting better each day. So instead of focusing on getting good at something overnight or over a week, you focus on trying to get better at something each day, a little better. And over time, like over a year or 6 months, you don't notice how you spend such a little effort in getting a little better each day, but in the end you got so good at something that you can't even believe the results. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Well, this is a really famous novel, and I really like it because it covers the human nature and how corrupted it can be. So it's a story about a man, a really young man, who sold his soul for internal beauty and use, and how hedonic pleasures didn't make him happy in the end. So, Atomic Habits by James Clear, probably the most hyped book. So if you decide to read Atomic Habits, I don't think that you would ever need to read other self-help books, because Atomic Habits comprises all the information, all the practical tips that you're going to use in real life. And yeah, it's a good read, but only considering that you haven't never read other self-help books. Think Big by Grace Lordan is another book about how thinking in grand scales can help you to see where you're going. Honestly, I don't remember much about that book, but I don't think that you ever need to read it because, it's not that interesting. The Art of Being Unreasonable by Eli Broad. I think this book is really transformational in the sense that it shows you how by being unreasonable, that is, being not like everyone, you can achieve really high results, and that's how Eli Broad actually got to be a millionaire. So Good That They Can Ignore You by Cal Newport. I think it's one book that everyone should read because I was completely amazed. He's basically saying that follow your passion is a bad advice, and after reading the book, I am convinced that following your passion is not exactly what I want to do in my life, and it actually can be bad advice. All of the people are saying that follow your passion is probably what you should do with your life, but apparently it's not. And instead, you can be so good that the people can't ignore you. So I won't tell much about it, but you have to read it. Sovereign Individual by James Davidson. So James Davidson is an investor. He and his team of scientists and investors, analysts, and all other professionals back in 1990s made a lot of predictions about the future. After 30 years, you can already see some changes, and you can already see some things that they predicted that were completely off. And it's really interesting to see how they thought the future would turn out. I've never thought that reading a book about predictions made in the past would be so interesting. Einstein Dreams by Alan Lightman is a fictional book about Einstein and how he came up with relativity theory. It is really interesting. I was mind blown how the author of the book could interpret the physical notions and physical concepts in such illustrative ways just using the words. So it's really interesting to see all the different worlds that the author comes up with and how it's related to Einstein. I think it's one of the greatest books about Einstein, honestly. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman and Andrzej Tversky are Nobel Prize winners in economics. They were who proposed the two systems of the mind. So there's system 1, which is emotional and irrational, and system 2, which is slow and more deliberate and more logical. So they basically explain why people's behavior changed and how it affects the economy. So it's probably the only book that you have to read about behavior and economics. And The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz is a book about why capitalism and consumerism are not good things inherently. So Barry argues that availability to a lot of options is not a good thing for consumers because their decision-making process is actually declining in quality as there are so many options and consumers can virtually know all the benefits and drawbacks of each option available. Thus, they either take a lot of time to go through all the options or they choose the option which is not that good for them. And he also covers other examples of why more is less. The Art of Thinking Clearly. This is basically a collection of short stories and, to be precise, 99 stories about common errors of judgment. So if you don't want to read about behavior, psychology, and whatever, you can just read this book and basically know all the bias of human behavior. Influence is a book about how to become persuasive and how persuasion and human psychology work. It has 6 principles about how and why you should be more persuasive. Factfulness by Hans Rosling is something similar to Fashionable Nonsense, but in terms of general audience. So we are so used to making generalizations and stereotypes about everything. Factfulness is a cry for knowing facts and only then sharing them and making judgments based on them. 100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozy. Alex Hormozy is a successful entrepreneur who is now investing in so many different businesses and helps them with his 100 million offers framework. So this book is about how to make your offers so good that people feel stupid not saying yes to them. Reality is Not What It Seems by Carlo Rovelli is my attempt to go into physics, and I don't know why I chose to read this book first, because it's about quantum mechanics. Even though it's an introductory level that is for beginners, I still didn't understand anything. Then I tried to read the 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, also by Carlo Ravelli, and this one was actually interesting. And if you don't know anything about physics, you can read it, and it's really understandable, even for total noobs like me. Unlike 60 Theses by Richard Feynman, I didn't like it, probably because it's old and it was published like in 1990s or 1980s. And Siddhartha is a novel about a man in India who tries to find his meaning in different phases of his life, and it changed your perspective on the life completely. So Herman Hesse is the author of the book, and he's famous for philosophical view on different things, and it's one of the best books that I've read. Mindset by Carl Dweck. I think I'm going to be wrong if I say that it's an expansion of Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2, but Carl Dweck also suggests that there are two systems in our mindset, fixed mindset and growth mindset. Carl Dweck explains the difference between them and why should you choose the growth mindset if you have fixed mindset, and how to maximize benefits of your growth mindset. Brain, The Story of You by David Eagleman is a journey into your brain. It basically asks the questions: who are you, how do you make decisions, what is your brain, and tries to answer them. David Eagleman is a neuroscientist who is trying to find out how billions and trillions of brain cells emerge into something which is you. Free Will by Sam Harris. Sam Harris wonders whether people's thoughts and decisions are authentic, whether they come from themselves or from the environment where they live in. How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. It's essentially an autobiography of Felix Dennis with a screaming name in order to get more people to read this book. Even though it's a little bit cringy, I really liked it because Felix Dennis is honest about his experience, about his life journey, about the mistakes that he made. He's the only guy that I've read who is not afraid of talking about his drug addictions, financial frauds, and what it cost him to not lose his life while being at his lowest point. Unfortunately, reading this book doesn't make you rich. A Gentleman in Moscow is a beautiful story about a fictional man, Rostov Raskolnikov, who was an aristocrat before the revolution in Russia, and after the revolution, Bolsheviks sent him to a hotel for a life sentence. The Coddling of American Mind is a book about why Americans' education system is flawed, what happens with students at colleges, and why more and more Americans struggle to find work. It tells the reason why so many young people feel anxious and why college is not enough for preparing students for adult life. Nudge by Cass Sustein is a book about why human behavior is irrational and how can we benefit from it. For example, nudging people into doing something is the button elevator which closes and opens the doors. Even though elevator closes and doors automatically, when you press the button you feel like the time goes by faster. It actually makes you less angry and less stressed. The Way of Superior Man. So this book answers the question like how to find purpose in your life, how to be a good lover, and how to be a worthy man. Even though David DeVilla initially planned this book for men, and I think this book is suited for everyone because the advice is actually practical and makes sense to everyone, especially now that gender definitions are blurred. To Kill a Mockingbird by Lee Harper is considered to be an American masterpiece. It's a simple love story which takes readers to roots of human behavior. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin is a story about a person who's trying to find his identity, and he turns out to be gay, but it's really difficult to be gay in his world where his parents and friends don't accept him as he is, and he tries to find himself in other countries. The Second Mountain by David Brooks. David Brooks is a renowned psychologist, and he argues that we have two mountains to climb before we die, and the first mountain is the more self-centered and is about hedonic pleasures. It's when you try to get as much as possible, for example, go up in the corporate ladder. But as soon as you climb the mountain, that way you understand that material things and opinions of others are not that important, and that's when you start your second journey, which is all about being philanthropic and finding the true meaning in your life, how to be helpful and how to make authentic relationships with people. The Perfection Trap by Thomas Corrin is about why perfectionism is not a desirable trait, why it's actually bad and can be toxic, and how perfectionists underperform comparing to other people. It helped me a lot because I used to be a perfectionist and I used to be always anxious because of it. So if you're a perfectionist, you should really try it. Someday is Today by Matthew Dix. Someday is today. So basically don't postpone anything for tomorrow. If you can do something today or if you have something in mind, don't think, well, I need first to graduate from the, uni in order to work. If you want to work, work now, because you're ultimately stealing the time from your future self, thus not making anything and resulting in the dead loss of your time. Drive by Daniel Pink is a book about how motivation works, and Daniel Pink explains why motivation is not about just carrot and sticks, and how different incentives and different settings actually impact on our decision making. He also explains how motivation works, how we get motivated, and why motivational videos are so addictive. Finite and Infinite Games by James Cars is a book about the world, but in the view of infinite and finite games. James Cars argues that everything in the world can be simplified to games, and there are two types of games, infinite and finite. James Cars says that if we all, meaning all the humanity, engage in infinite games, we ultimately will make our lives better. Purple Cow by Seth Godin is probably the most famous book about marketing, and it's a really good one. Purple Cow is not just the name of the book, it's also a concept. So for example, Seth Godin says that you have to be like a purple cow, meaning cows are boring after you've seen one, two, or three, and when you see a purple cow, you're like amazed. You've never seen one, and it really catches your attention. So that's how your marketing strategy should look like. Talent is Overrated is a book about why some people are talented, and it also proves that people with no talent have the equally same chance of getting into professional world of what they're doing as people with talent. No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover is a book for all the nice people who try to be nice all the time and who try really hard to please someone, who try to be optimistic every time and have a smile on. So it can be really overwhelming. And I know from my personal experience, if you are a Mr. Nice Guy, you should probably read it. Quarter Life Crisis by Alexander Robbins is all about young people having crises. So we all heard about midlife crisis, but something happened during the 21st century, which a little bit shifted the midlife crisis to people having crises after college, which is 20 to 25 age bracket. How to Not Die Alone by Logan Ury is a book explaining why relationships are important in your life, not just romantic ones, and how to not die alone basically. If you're struggling with social interactions and maintaining relationships, I think that's the book that you have to read. A Grey House by Mariam Patrician is a novel about disabled children who live in boarding school and who try to avoid reality because it's so painful for them to live in the world which is real. The 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna West is a collection of 101 short essays about heuristics, biases, prejudices, fallacies, and all the other things that are common among people and how to deal with them. It's a really good self-help book, and Brianna West is a really good writer because The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. Louise Perry is a really brave young woman because she's the only one who is willing to talk about side effects of sexual revolution, which seems nobody is talking about. The problem is that there are also some side effects that are not dealt with. Louise Perry proposes her own ways how to deal with them and gives practical advice which can be applied to everybody. Think Again by Adam Grant is about why people have doubt and how doubt is actually a good thing. Why doubting something can be a sign to think thoroughly about something, how to improve your decision making from doubting. It's also about how to learn to be happy when you make mistakes. Dune by Frank Herbert. So I read the whole saga, and it consists of 6 books. It's probably the most famous science fiction that you can find. It's famous for a reason. Frank Herbert made a really good job putting so much detail in the world where the actions take place and of each character, so each character feels full with his own personal stories, and it's like a history book but about the future and science. 30 things mentally strong people don't do by Emir Morin is about how to improve your mental well-being. It really does a good job because I learned so much from it. And one example being that I learned that the world doesn't owe me anything, and for everything I have to work. There is no cutting back or getting slack. Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman is a pioneer of the term emotional intelligence, and in his book, not surprisingly, he talks about emotional intelligence, and he explains why emotional intelligence is so important, and it can be even more important than IQ. Principles: Why Nations Succeed and Fail by Dale O'Reilly. Dale O'Reilly is a successful investor, and he talks about how different countries interact in our world and how he was able to make a lot of money through investing. And Predictions. A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson is actually one of my favorite books that I've ever read because it's what it says to be. It's a short history of nearly everything. It's like an ultimate encyclopedia that we've probably read when you were little. It's a book about every possible thing that you can imagine. So for curious one, it's a must read. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So it's a negotiating guidebook. So Chris Voss was an FBI agent who was specializing in negotiating, and he shares his tips and practices that were used in the real FBI cases and how you can implement them in your real life. The Courage to be Disliked is a story about a philosophy professor and a librarian who argue about the meaning of the life. They incorporate Alfred Adler's theories, and it's my second favorite book about philosophy and life. So it's really interesting. And The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason is a story about how people got rich or wealthy in the past, and it's an interesting uh, thing to see similarities between people in the past and people in the present, because we all want the same thing, personal wealth. But the most striking thing is that economical principles and financial transactions that made people rich in Babylon are also applicable, maybe in slightly different forms, but fundamentally the same in the present. The Little Prince by Antoine d'Exupery, story about life and meaning and why relationships are so important in our life. So heartwarming, and I almost cried when finishing it. The Unfair Advantage by Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba. Hassan Kuba and Ash Ali are startup investors, and they actually had their own startup. So in this book they propose that people from different worlds, whether it's third world countries or the rich country, can have unfair advantages that they can use in order to get extraordinary results. So for example, if you're living in a third world country, you're poor, you have some kind of advantage that you have to find and apply in your life in order to get extraordinary results. Phew, the last book, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. So Robert Greene shares 48 laws of power that he thinks are essential, how to use power. He shares some of his controversial ideas and opinions about the power, and some people think that his ways of using this power are unethical and immoral. And well, I agree, but the most important thing is that after reading this book, I've never used even one advice or one law of power, so I don't know whether it's worth the read. Okay, so these were all the books that I read in 2023. I hope that you found the video interesting. Let me know in the comments what books you've read and what books you're going to read in 2024. And thank you for watching. Bye bye.